Hello, Baker International Finance students. It is now January 2019. I hope everybody had a happy new year and great holidays. So let's start off with a course that is more of a reflective course, I would call it, with international finance. We have a very small cohort of 3 people, which is fine. So I just want to kind of go over a little bit of the expectations of the course for this week and also give you some highlights from the chapters. So with the course itself, some of the main things that we're going to do in this course, one obviously is the forum discussion. So it is going to be critical with only 3 people that everybody jumps into the forum discussion, makes a post by Thursday. That way it will allow some time for your peers to respond. So we do a lot of learning through the forum discussion. So we're going to pull in current events. Once you go through the syllabus and read through that, but really try to tie in something that is relevant to that week's chapters. And with international finance, there's a plethora of things that you can pull from in the current events. And I'll probably try to jump in there too in your post and add some value that way. But we're going to learn from each other this way. So find something that's interesting to you and make a post. And we'll give some feedback to each other. But it's critical you make sure to jump in Thursday and make sure there's a reply post by Sunday, because the forum discussions will close out at the end of Sunday. All right, you'll have quizzes. These quizzes, there should be an opportunity for you to earn full points in these quizzes because you are allowed 2 attempts, because you'll get to see what the answers are after your first attempt. But again, those quizzes will close out each week, so make sure to get those done and completed by the end of the week. And the main thing is the homework. So the homework is really relatively, it's simple. It's a way for you to kind of look at a template and figure out what would the appropriate formula be to be in that template, but it's giving you some exposure to international quantitative thinking. So again, the purpose of this course is really to give you some exposure to, from a multinational enterprise firm, how a manager would think. So it's an undergraduate course. So it's going to give you some exposure, some learning objectives, understanding international finance. But if you have questions on the homework, do let me know, and I will jump in and help you. So the best way is to get a hold of me via email. You can also leave a phone message too, but email is the preferred. And I will try to get back to you that day or the following day at the latest. I will probably jump in the course every other day just to see how things are going. And more so towards the weekend, as that's when the majority of the forum discussion usually occurs in these types of courses. So, all right, that was the overview of the course. A little bit about this week's objectives. So we'll have readings chapters 1, 2, and 3. Start off with chapter 1. Kind of gives an introduction to the changes with foreign exchange. So if I use the terminology FX, just think of that as foreign exchange. And the foreign exchange market is the largest market in the world. I would argue that. And it's just as you would learn in economics with supply and demand, there's a supply and demand with currencies. And sometimes those currencies are controlled and sometimes they're not. So you're going to learn about difference between fixed and floating rate in these chapters this week. But from the first chapter kind of gives a little bit of an overview history as I look through my notes here, and it also talks about this impossible trinity. The idea that you can have exchange rate stability, free flow of capital, and monetary independence. For like the example of the United States, we have a free flow of capital and monetary independence, but we can't have a fixed exchange rate, so that's why we have a floating exchange rate. So as you go through these readings in the chapters, you'll notice examples where other countries have to sacrifice one of these things. You can't have all 3 of these things. Some other things that you'll kind of read about in this chapter will be with the appreciation and depreciation of currency. One thing I want to kind of understand right off the bat is that most countries want to get paid in their own currency. So if I'm as American and I'm engaging in a contract with the European and they're wanting to be paid in euros, if the price of the euro goes up, that means that I'm going to have to come up with more American dollars to buy that euro, so it's going to be appreciating. At the same time, that means that the US dollar has to be depreciating. So as a manager, and why we want to be paying attention to international finance is that there's all these different variables going on in different economies, and that can affect interest rates, it can affect borrowing costs, it can affect productivity in a country, Where do I want to go? Are there opportunities? We need to be paying attention to these things. So, but this chapter gives a good example, I think, with the Pokemon Go. It's kind of an interesting story about how it, because of differences in the changes in the Mexican peso, how the Japanese kind of got burned. So, there's later things we'll look at about how we can protect ourselves through futures and options. But for the focus of these first 3 chapters is just kind of telling you about some of these risks that exist out in these markets. Okay. But getting back to the last thing I want to cover in this chapter is chapter 1. We talked about the idea of comparative advantage. And this goes all the way back to David Ricardo, back in the 1800s when he realized, and Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, recognized this too, a classical economist, that we are able to enjoy a lifestyle today that would not be possible without international trade. And international trade is not going away. It's going to continue to grow. So it's kind of interesting in the news right now in our current administration where you're having a lot of tariffs and questions about trade. So protectionist viewpoints may not be the best in the long run of our economy. So we'll have to see how this unfolds in 2019. But it is a concern to the market. We have a lot of up and down of these jitters in the market right now because of certain statements by our president. So, but the idea of comparative advantage is that by engaging in trade with other countries that have a lower opportunity cost to producing a good or service, both countries can gain more than being just an isolated and closed economy. This chapter also talked about LIBOR, the London Interbank Offering Rate. It's kind of a conglomeration of an average interest rates. And a lot of times this LIBOR is used as an average or a base rate. And it might say that, hey, I'm going to borrow at LIBOR plus so many basis points. Okay. I think last thing, just kind of refreshing it with that chapter 1, multinational enterprise. There's different reasons why. It could be raw materials, could be looking at a particular market, could look at production efficiency, could be knowledge seeking. So there's different reasons why firms want to engage in activities in other countries, whether it's through trade or actually going there directly. Just like you see in the commercials, I've been watching a lot of football games lately, bowl games about these Mercedes-Benz vans being produced in South Carolina. So it benefits both the Germans and it benefits both the Americans too. All right, chapter 2, you're going to get a little bit more about the history of the gold standard. All the way from 1876 to 1913, the interwar years, and after World War II, the United States really came out ahead. And we kind of established economic dominance in the world. So they talked about the Bretton Woods system that was established. And then later, the idea of eventually going to a fixed versus floating rate exchange system. So with a fixed exchange rate system, you have to have the ability to have enough reserve currencies on hand to keep it fixed. Floating just kind of says whatever's going on in the market, but there's probably a combination of that government intervention intervening once in a while if they want it to hold with a particular direction. This, again, you'll talk about the impossible trinity in this chapter, and then there's a lot of time spent on the idea of the euro. Everything from the development of the Maastricht Treaty back in the early 90s to the full conversion back in about 2001, where I remember I was at Sprint working there at that time. We had adjusted the one currency of the euro. And more recently, the concerns of the Brexit, is this protectionism, what potential ill effects it might have in the long run for Britain. Last chapter, chapter 3, the balance of payments, as the authors point out, it's a little bit confusing. It's not really a balance sheet, it's really a statement of cash flows. But you're going to look at 3 major sub-accounts. The current account, you think about the current account, that's one we're probably most familiar with. We think about like goods and services being traded. And the United States has had a trade deficit for years. We actually have a surplus in the services. We export a lot more services. You have the capital account, you think about a transfer of financial assets, and then the financial account. That can be an example like direct ownership. That would be like Chinese buying mines in Australia. So, all right. So, last thing I just want to make sure, to talk about is that with exchange rates, the change can happen slowly. This is where I talked about the J curve in this chapter. and what they call like the pass-through period. So markets don't always react as quickly as or being efficient in equilibrium as we would maybe predict. So there can be some discrepancies in times for adjustment. And with the last thing to wrap up with this chapter, talk about capital flow and recognizing that, especially in smaller economies, money tends to move like a school fish. If things are not going well, people are going to pull that money out of that country very quickly. So some countries that establish very open capital may have issues too, that if all of a sudden the capital flows out, the country is really struck in a dilemma. So, all right. Well, anyway, I'm looking forward to working with all of you over this next 6 weeks. So do send me an email if you have any questions. But I will post these videos weekly, typically on the weekend, like on a Sunday for starting the Monday. This one I'm just posting a little bit earlier to kind of get things caught up as I go back to work. But I look forward to working with you all soon. Take care.